The battlefield was still warm. Ash coated everything bitter static-charged, clinging to Kieran Holt's skin as he trudged through the skeletal remains of the outpost. His tactical display blinked red warnings, but he ignored them. No enemies remained alive in the crater-blasted zone, at least not the kind he could still shoot. The rest heat echoes smoldering tech twitching drone limbs painted a ruined tapestry of what used to be forward position Gamma-17 on the planet Varnak's third moon. Kieran's boots cracked ceramic plating as he stepped over a collapsed barricade. Somewhere behind him, his squad had pulled out in the dropship, leaving him to search for something. He wasn't sure what. Orders didn't cover curiosity, and curiosity was exactly what had saved his life more times than protocol. His HUD flickered. A weak biometric signal pulsed from beneath the ruins ahead. Faint. Almost missed it. Human. No, the rhythm was off. Slower. Layered. Alien. And not a drone or animal either. He raised his plasma sidearm, instinct taut, as he slid down a bank of pulverized concrete. The signal grew clearer, closer. Then he saw it partially buried under jagged slabs of armor plating and insulation foam. A cell. Not a typical cage, but a containment module, triangular, with scorched etching along the side. It had once been part of an elite scout vessel, now half melted and fused into the bunker wreckage. He brushed aside the debris, and for a moment he thought the figure inside was dead. Then she moved. Barely. A flick of silver-white hair, a hand shackled, green-skinned and trembling. Her body was curled gaunt, but muscled, laced with scars both fresh and faded. Her eyes opened slowly, iridescent and sharp, despite the fatigue, and fixed on him, like he might be just another hallucination from pain or heat stroke. Kieran didn't speak. His pulse slowed, his weapon lowered. She wasn't like any alien he'd seen. Emerald skin glistened faintly beneath the dust, and her face was regal, angular, unmistakably sentient. But it was her gaze that held him, not afraid, not pleading, just watching, measuring. Ready to die if he made the wrong move. She flinched as he approached the panel. Her chains clinked with static electricity. The locking mechanism sparked. Easy, he muttered, more to himself than her, not a threat. He unhooked the portable microtorch from his belt. Her eyes narrowed. Then wordlessly she offered him her bound wrist. The first cut through the restraint took 10 seconds. The second less. She didn't cry out when the metal seared her skin, only hissed faintly through clenched teeth. When she stood, she staggered. He caught her reflexively, and her body tensed in his arms. Warm. Surprisingly warm. She wore a scorched exocloth uniform that reeked of coolant fluid and blood, the sigils scorched beyond reading. She didn't thank him. Her lips moved in her own tongue, then again haltingly in his why. Help. Kieran looked at her, at the bruise swelling along her temple, the burns on her back, the precision of how she'd been caged to die slow. No part of this was strategic. No one was watching, and yet, "You looked like you needed it," he said. A strange silence followed. Not empty, just weighted. Then her shoulders eased a fraction. She nodded once. A gesture of, not gratitude exactly, but acknowledgement. A soft hiss made him turn. Behind them, the burned wall shifted. Metal scraped. A vibration ran through the floor. They're collapsing the ridge, he realized. We have to move. She didn't hesitate. Despite her injuries, she followed as he broke into a jog, limping after him across the unstable flooring. Her footfalls were silent. Almost too silent. She moved like a shadow trained to disappear. But the way she limped revealed pain buried beneath discipline. They climbed a slope of rubble toward an access vent. Behind them, the module finally gave way, plunging into the lower crater in a storm of flame and shrieking metal. He pulled her through the vent just before the tunnel mouth imploded. Inside the maintenance corridor, emergency lights flickered like dying fireflies. The girl collapsed to her knees, breathing hard. Kieran pulled off his auxiliary kit and unrolled a thermal wrap. When he held it out, she hesitated again, then reached for it. Their fingers brushed. It wasn't much, just friction, a spark of warmth transferred through synthetic cloth. But she froze mid-motion, staring down at her hand, then at his. "You burn hotter," she said quietly. He blinked. "Humans run warmer than most. Guess we've got inefficient biology." Or fire-heart. He didn't know if it was a mistranslation or a metaphor, but something in his chest pulled taut. She wrapped the blanket around her shoulders, tugged the edges close. Her expression changed, still distant, but softened at the edges. And then, almost ceremonially, she drew a small scrap of cloth from her belt pouch, stained with coolant oil worn soft. She offered it to him, a gesture that made no sense. "What's this?" She tilted her head. "My people don't give names. We give cloth." He stared at it. The meaning dawned slowly. It wasn't just fabric, it was a mark, an acknowledgement, a code. "Then I guess I owe you something in return," he said, pulling a strip of gauze from his own pouch and offering it back. Their trade was silent, binding. Later, as the corridor walls trembled and distant rumblings echoed through the complex, they sat side by side in the dark, catching breath, neither quite looking at the other. But between them lay the two pieces of cloth, twin talismans of a decision neither of them could take back. They moved through the wrecked underbelly of the outpost like hunted animals. Every junction brought new hazards: crushed ceilings, exposed power conduits, sparking like forked lightning, collapsed scaffolding. Kieran led with practiced efficiency, mapping routes on his cracked wrist display, cross-checking them against a half-corrupted blueprint of the facility. But the girl Alira, he'd heard her mutter once, navigated with eerie intuition, sensing structural instabilities, signaling quiet detours with sharp glances and small gestures. For all her injuries, she moved like someone built for survival. They emerged into a shattered loading bay. Bodies lay scattered in twisted armor. Kieran paused beside one and checked for identification, not because he expected to find a friend, but because he always did. Protocol demanded confirmation of death. Alira stepped over a corpse without looking. But then she doubled back, crouched. Her fingers brushed the sidearm still in the fallen trooper's grasp. She took it. "Yours?" he asked. "No. Better than nothing." She answered coolly, checking the charge level with one hand while unhooking a fragment of armor plating with the other. She didn't explain further. She didn't have to. They were alike in ways he hadn't expected. Kieran tossed her a nutrient bar. She caught it midair, sniffed it, then took a cautious bite. Her face twisted in distaste. "Humans eat this willingly." He shrugged. "Keeps you from dying. Flavor's a bonus." A ghost of a smirk tugged at her mouth, then vanished. They reached a maintenance stairwell that plunged 3 stories into darkness. The elevator shaft beside it was half collapsed, and power fluctuations made the steps buzz faintly with electromagnetic residue. Kieran paused at the top and gestured. "You go first. If anything gives way, I'll catch you." Alira didn't move. "I weigh more," she said simply. "If it fails better, I fall alone." He stepped aside and she passed him quietly, but not without a lingering look. Something unspoken hovered in her eyes. Not mistrust, something softer. She was halfway down the stairs when the groaning of metal echoed above them. Kieran didn't think, just moved. The stairwell groaned as a support beam collapsed from above. Alira was directly below it. He launched himself forward, grabbing her around the waist and rolling them both to the landing as the beam crashed behind them, showering sparks and debris. They landed in a tangled heap. Dust filled the air. Kieran's arm wrapped protectively around her head. Her hand gripped his jacket. For a breathless moment, neither moved. Then she said, voice muffled by his shoulder, "That was reckless." He chuckled, coughing on ash. "Yeah, I get that a lot." Her body tensed against his, then slowly relaxed. She didn't pull away. Her forehead rested against his neck, and for a long beat, she just breathed deep, controlled, steadying herself with his presence. Finally, she sat up. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "I know." "Then why?" He glanced at her. Her silver-white hair was streaked with soot. Her cheeks smeared with blood, but her eyes, still that hypnotic iridescence, watched him like he held an answer to a question she hadn't dared ask before. "I told you," he said, adjusting his pack fire heart. The smile that passed over her lips was brief but real. They descended the rest of the way in silence. Not awkward silence, earned silence. Bonded by movement, by breath, by the knowledge that each had risked something for the other. When they reached the lower level, the passage opened into an ancient transit tunnel, long abandoned walls, slick with condensation and rusted biometal. An old rail system curved ahead like the spine of a buried beast. Alira paused. "There's a zone ahead. We call it the Black Vein." Kieran's brows lifted. "Sounds friendly." "It's not. Magnetic flux distorts sensors. Creatures nest in the corners. Light won't always work right." "Perfect." They pushed forward, weapons drawn. The light in the tunnel twisted subtly, shadows flickering without source, reflections appearing on the wrong surfaces. Kieran's HUD glitched. Alira ignored it. A low growl reverberated through the walls. They froze. Then it moved fast. A blur of motion shot from the ceiling. Kieran fired by instinct, the plasma bolt slicing through a serpentine form mid-lunge. It collapsed in a heap of limbs and chitin hissing. Others followed. "Run!" Alira snapped, and they sprinted. Shapes dropped from Duck's claws, scraping. Kieran lobbed an incendiary grenade over his shoulder. The detonation lit the tunnel in violent orange painting, monstrous silhouettes on the walls. They didn't stop running until they reached the far terminus, a sealed bulkhead, dead power. Kieran swore. Alira moved past him, placing her palm flat on a side panel. Her skin glowed faintly green, and with a low chime, ancient circuits sparked to life. The door hissed open. He stared. "You're bonded to their tech." She didn't answer, just slipped through the doorway, pausing only to say, "Not theirs, mine." Inside was a cavernous chamber lit by bioluminescent nodes embedded in the walls. The air shifted, warm, buzzing. At the far end stood a device, a curved pulsating pod, part biological, part crystalline. It resembled a sarcophagus, or a womb. Kieran blinked. "What is this?" She walked toward it slowly. "My people use these to heal, to connect. It's still functioning. We going in. We won't survive long enough without it." He hesitated. Her eyes met his. "We have to sync," she said. "It requires closeness, touch, not just physical." His heart pounded. "What kind of sync?" Her lips curved, almost amused at his discomfort. "You humans have so many words for intimacy. We have only one." He stepped forward. "Then show me." She nodded. As they entered the pod, the walls shimmered. Light swallowed them whole. Warmth closed in like breath against skin. The pod sealed with a low hum, its interior pulsing faintly with golden blue light. The walls were soft like muscle, like silk rippling in response to touch and proximity. Kieran's first sensation wasn't pain or fear, but memory. The crisp scent of dry ozone after a storm, the distant roar of orbital engines overhead, a feeling of being held in something ancient, alive, and curious. Alira stood close, no longer shivering. Her skin radiated low heat, casting a faint emerald hue across the confined space. She touched a bioluminescent node on the inner wall, and the chamber answered, sinking in temperature, raising oxygen flow, wrapping them both in electrostatic film. "It's begun," she murmured. He felt it. A flicker, like a second heartbeat, not his own. Something foreign brushed the edge of his consciousness, tasting his thoughts, inspecting his emotions, not with intrusion, but familiarity. He staggered slightly. His own mind echoed back at him, but with accents. Colors, things he hadn't known he'd carried. Regrets. Childhood images. The feel of the leather gloves his father wore, even though Earth hadn't been cold in a decade. And her thoughts. Her scent. Her fear. When the cell collapsed, her memory of Kyle, his betrayal. Her hatred. Her defiance. Images swirled behind his eyes. An emerald sky, hands reaching for help that never came, sharp metal across soft skin. Loneliness stretched across years. A voice whispering her name in the dark. His voice now. "I didn't mean to see that," he said aloud. "You didn't," Alira replied softly. "It saw you, then showed me." Her hands had found his, he didn't remember when. The chamber moved in rhythm with their breathing, now amplifying resonance. Beneath their feet, strands of biocrystal pulsed with encoded light. With every shared second, his nerves sang in harmony with hers. Language dissolved. There were no more translations, only impressions. She understood the weight in his jaw when he clenched it. He felt her strength every time she hid her scars. He understood now why this pod had been locked away. "It wasn't built for one species," she whispered, voice barely more than breath. "It was made for two. Different. Needing each other." The air grew heavier. The pod adjusted again, drawing their bodies closer as the link solidified. The healing process had begun, but it required the full alignment of the host pair. Not just physical compatibility, but trust will rhythm. Alira pressed her forehead to his. He didn't pull away. "You're afraid," she said, not accusing, just aware. "Yes," he admitted. "Of me. No, of what happens if this ends." She closed her eyes. "It won't." The pod brightened suddenly. Bioelectricity danced along their skin in threads of gold and green. Pain flushed through Kieran's side. The wound from the debris reawakened, but then faded, replaced by heat. Healing. Shared. The floor beneath them dissolved into light. Their bodies lifted an inch, suspended in the field nerves, fused by microcurrents, and memory breath mingled. His fingers curled into the curve of her waist without command. She didn't resist. Her skin hummed like tuned crystal. They were both trembling, not from fear, but contact. 1,000 details bloomed between them. The texture of his hair, The rhythm of her laugh rare but present. The memory of her first snowfall on a methane moon. The weight of a brother's betrayal. Each detail settled like paint on wet canvas, running, mixing, forming something new. Suddenly, Alira stiffened. Her hand flew to her abdomen. Her eyes widened, not with pain, but with recognition. "What is it?" he asked, voice hoarse. The pod vibrated. She didn't speak immediately. Her lips parted, then closed again. Her free hand pressed his chest, not pushing away, but anchoring herself. "It's not just a link," she finally said. "It's seated." He didn't understand. Until he did. Not a metaphor, not just memory or mind. Life. The pod had read their compatibility, their fusion, their genetic entanglement, and acted. It had triggered what her people called continuum propagation. Not reproduction in the biological sense, but an echo, an emergent synthesis. A new being. A child, he asked. Not out of disbelief, just awe. Something like one she replied. Half you, half me. Not accidental, not avoidable. His heart raced, but not with panic. What happens now? Alira exhaled. Her fingers traced a pattern along his collarbone. It felt like scripture. We carry it, we fight with it. It sees us, hears us, now. Their bond crackled into something deeper. Kieran felt it behind his eyes like a third presence. Curious, quiet, watching, and protective. The pod released them slowly. They landed lightly, no longer shivering, no longer separate. The air around them smelled like thunder and something impossibly sweet. Alira leaned her forehead to his again. "This link is permanent." "I know," he replied. "We can't undo it." "I wouldn't." She smiled then, a small intimate curve that radiated through their bond. The pod opened with a hiss. Outside, alarms echoed faintly in the distance. The enemy Kael's mercenaries were scanning the ruins. Movement skittered through the tunnel behind them. Kieran drew his sidearm. Alira lifted her salvaged plasma lance. Their hands moved in tandem, weapons raised at the same moment, breath sinking without effort. They stepped out together. Not two soldiers anymore. Something else. The first kill was silent. Kieran's blade slid between the armored plates of the scout's exosuit. The motion guided less by aim and more by instinct. Instinct not entirely his own. He could feel her in the rhythm of his movement like a second pulse beneath his skin. When he moved, she anticipated. When she turned, he pivoted to match her blind spot. No words passed between them. They didn't need any. The bond had become a battlefield interface. Alira fired her plasma lance without looking, arcing a bolt that ricocheted off a wall and nailed a sniper in the upper gantry. Kieran ducked the return fire half a second before it came. He hadn't heard it, hadn't seen it, but she had. And he'd felt her thought before she processed it. Their breath was one rhythm now. Their pain shared. Their senses widened like a funnel, drawing in each other's awareness like airflow feeding a flame. They were unstoppable. The tunnel ahead erupted in sparks as a combat drone rolled in, screeching with auto-loaded chain blades. Kieran dropped to one knee, stabilizing his pistol against a broken pillar, but Alira was already moving. She darted left, drawing the drone's focus. Kieran flanked from the right. One shot from him disabled its locomotion. A second from her overloaded its core. It exploded in a blossom of green flame. Through it all, the child the presence watched. Not in fear, not in silence, but as a steady pressure against Kieran's chest. Protective, curious, growing. He could feel its impressions in flashes, heat, light, and tension. Not yet sentient, but already alive in a way beyond biology. "She's aware of danger," Alira whispered as they ducked into cover. "She knows we're in battle." I can feel her heartbeat between mine." He touched his side where his shirt stuck damp with blood and heat. "So can I." Their next target was Kael's forward perimeter. A relic gunpost operated by neural input connected to a spine-linked operator. Kieran had read the briefings. The old tech was brutal but slow. Once inside its network, a bonded pair could confuse its input long enough to disable the whole node. "Think we can hack it?" he asked. "Not alone." "Good thing we're not alone anymore." They crept toward the sentry nest. Two guards stood outside their armor, humming with sensor static. Kieran focused on the left. Alira nodded, already stepping into motion. One breath, two. They struck like mirrored ghosts, his knife sliding through the guard's throat, just as her elbow shattered the other's visor. She snapped her opponent's neck with a twist, already moving toward the control panel before the body hit the ground. He fed her the sequence mentally, and her fingers danced across the keys. The lock opened with a hiss. Inside the interface pulsed an archaic mess of fluid conduits and nerve-like filaments. Alira stepped in first. The strands reached for her, then paused, waited. When Kieran entered, they surged, accepting them both. Biotech tendrils curled around their wrists. The room dimmed. They inhaled at the same time. And suddenly, they were the turret. The room dissolved into a tactical panorama, every weapon signature on the ridge lighting up in their minds like constellations. A dozen targets. 24. Heat signatures. Threat levels. Charge states. Even radio frequencies flowing like color-coded lines of music through their consciousness. "I've got their movement patterns," Kieran said aloud, but she already knew. "I'm loading overload spikes in the coolant veins," Alira replied, even as his hand moved to initiate it. They triggered the turret in reverse, its entire charge redirected inward. The neural operator inside never stood a chance. One pulse, then silence. Then a chain reaction. The ridge cracked with explosion after explosion, Kyl's perimeter folding in on itself in a brilliant cascade of blue fire. The shockwave knocked them both backward. Kieran landed hard, gritting his teeth against the static roar behind his eyes. The bond flexed, calmed him. He turned to Alira, and for a brief moment, bathed in the ruin of their enemy's strength, he laughed. Not bitterly, but freely. She looked at him confused. "You're laughing?" she asked. "Why not? You and I just took down a ridge defense system from the inside. We've been bonded by a sentient alien pod, and I'm fairly certain we're carrying the universe's first mind-linked hybrid child." Alira blinked. Then in a voice as dry as desert heat, "Humans are insane." He grinned. "You're one of us now." That made her pause. Her expression shifted, softened. For all her discipline, all her edges, she was starting to glow with something different now. Not just power, but trust. The silence was broken by a proximity alarm from Kieran's wristband. Kale's secondary battalion fast movers, 5 minutes out. Heavy ordnance. They weren't retreating, they were regrouping. "Do we run?" he asked. Alira looked at the wreckage, at the smoke curling into the sky, drawing attention from every satellite within 10 light minutes. "No," she said. "We hold the line." "For what?" She turned toward him. Her voice was low. "For the others. There is a colony down below. Families. Children. They're not soldiers. If Kale breaks through, they die." He felt it too pressing from her mind into his. Faces. Voices. A dozen species living in fragile peace. Hiding. Hoping. And now exposed. Kieran adjusted his grip on his weapon. "Then we make this ground sacred." They moved together to the next overlook, positioning themselves above the basin, where Kyl's forces would funnel in. Kieran opened the magnetic clamps on 2 automated drones and synced their fire control to Alira's neural field. Her hands trembled as she accessed them, but the bond steadied her. They didn't speak again. They didn't need to. When the enemy appeared, it was in formation, tight, confident, armored. The first barrage came from above, drones firing in tandem with Kieran's marksmanship and Alira's command. Enemies fell. Their formations broke. Kale's voice finally came through on the open channel. "You've made your point, sister," he growled. "Now kneel." She stared at the receiver as if it had personally insulted her. Kieran stepped beside her. "Should I answer?" "No," she said. "He won't like our reply." Together, they fired one final volley directly into the approaching fuel transport. The blast washed the sky in fire. They didn't flinch. They were no longer separate. Smoke curled in slow, bruised spirals above the crater edge. Below what remained of Kyl's battalion was little more than scattered sparks and twisted hulls punctuated by the occasional hiss of something still burning. But there was no time to celebrate, no time to breathe. Kieran leaned against a fallen strut, one hand pressed tight to his side. Blood slicked his fingers, warm and slow. It wasn't critical, not yet, but it was draining him. He glanced sideways and found Alira already watching. "We need to retreat," she said. "You're compromised." "You say that like we're not both running on vapor." "We're not." Her hand touched his arm briefly. "I'm still burning. You flickering." It should have felt like scolding, but through the bond her worry spilled into him like a tide, protective, fierce. There was something maternal forming in her thoughts, not just for the unborn presence now anchored between them, but for him too. "I can hold," he said, but even he heard the weakness in his voice. She didn't argue. Instead, her eyes shifted upward, scanning the distant slope. A low rumble trembled through the ground. "Reinforcements," she murmured. "Heavy mechs. They're not regrouping, they're retaliating." He followed her gaze. Kale had brought in his war machines. 4-legged titans, 30 feet high, each one crawling with sensor arrays and gun turrets. Behind them came crawler tanks, shield drones, and atmospheric disruptors. Not a force meant to crush a rebel outpost. This was extermination. "They're not here for prisoners," Kieran said. "No," Alira replied. "They know what we are now." The bond. The pod. The hybrid pulse echoing between them. Kale must have sensed it, felt her slip away in a way he hadn't expected. She'd belonged to him once, not in body but in function. A tool, a promise. And now she was more. Alira turned to Kieran, expression solemn. "We won't survive another charge." He didn't answer, just looked out over the edge of the ravine to the hidden valley below. The colony was invisible from here, dug into the bedrock, shielded by bio-walls and mirrored camouflage. Dozens of species, hundreds of lives, families. "We don't need to survive," he said finally. "Just delay them long enough." Alira's hand found his again. She squeezed once. No. We don't throw ourselves into fire unless it lights a path." A glimmer passed between them, something hot and golden. It wasn't a feeling. It was someone. Their daughter, their not-yet-born, saw them, knew them. Her presence moved inside their joined awareness like a flare underwater, directionless, wordless, but intense. She wasn't afraid, and she was doing something. The air shifted. A hum began in Kieran's ears. Low at first, then louder. The hairs on his arms stood. He looked at Alira, and she looked skyward, her eyes wide. The sky cracked. Not with thunder, with code. Lines of glowing glyphs scrolled across the atmosphere, invisible to the unlinked, but to them, it was blinding. A data stream, ancient, alive. The pod hadn't just created a child. It had activated a signal. Alira dropped to her knees, eyes unfocused, mouth slightly open. Kieran caught her just before she collapsed fully. "She's interfacing," he whispered. "With what?" "Everything." The glyphs weren't just floating, they were moving with purpose, spiraling into the clouds. The sun above them flickered as light itself bent through a prism of genetic memory. Machines on the ridge powered down for half a second. Mechs stumbled, then static. From the far end of the ridge, Kael's voice returned over the open comms. But it was different now, strained, choked. "What have you done?" Alira didn't respond. She couldn't. Her body radiated heat. Not fever, but resonance. Feedback. The child inside her was using their minds as conduits, broadcasting some kind of synthesis. A bridge between Kael's corrupted machines and the untouched relic systems embedded across the old battlefield. Between war and memory. The war machines froze. Then they turned. Not in retreat, but toward him. Kael's dread voice boomed across the channel. "They've been reversed, the interface. It's overriding me." Kieran pulled Alira into his lap, shielding her from the rising energy storm around them. Her eyes fluttered open, glowing faintly with the same code that etched the sky. "She's protecting the colony," she whispered. He nodded. "And us." Her fingers gripped his sleeve. "That part's still up to you." He didn't hesitate. Lifting her, he stood barely, but moved downhill toward the access trench. The old shuttle they'd passed earlier, buried beneath rust and ash, might still work. If they could link into it, trigger the resonance one last time. A streak of light burned the edge of his vision. One of Kael's disruptor drones spotted them. "Cover your eyes," he whispered. She didn't. Instead, she raised one hand. The light bent. The drone's beam curved midair, arcing off course, crashing into its own launcher. Kieran turned and ran. The shuttle door hissed open at his touch. Inside, darkness. He laid Alira down across the padded alcove, fingers flying over the manual controls. Ancient systems. No OS interface. Everything had to be triggered physically, and yet something pulsed beneath the dashboard. Alive. He pressed both hands to the console, and their daughter answered. The ship's power surged. Displays lit up in old code. Emergency thrusters aligned. Targeting systems blinked online. Outside, Kael's voice screamed over the channel. "You think a hybrid can destroy me? I'll burn that thing out of you, Alira. Kieran cut the feed. Too late, he muttered, because now she wasn't just a hybrid. She was the system. She was the firewall. She was the new OS. The shuttle's weapons activated. One by one, the ridge's mechs lit up like lanterns in the dark, marked for targeting, not by aggression, but by rejection. "Not yours," the system whispered through the bond. "Not yours anymore." Kieran squeezed Alira's hand. She looked up at him with pride and exhaustion glowing faintly. "Tell her," she said softly. "Tell her to finish it." He didn't speak the words. He just felt them. And through him, she acted. The shuttle fired. Kael's remaining machines overloaded. Circuits reversed. Turrets turned inward. The ridge collapsed under its own weight, swallowed in fire and code. Silence fell, except for the steady heartbeat hers Alira's, his echoing together. Alive! Dust settled like ash on a battlefield funeral. For a long moment, there was only stillness. Not the kind born of absence, but of culmination of fury spent, of machines silenced, of something ancient finally breathing out. The sky above Jara Prime cleared in streaks of copper and gold, and the pulsing glyphs that had once shimmered like code across the atmosphere faded into pale daylight. Kieran stood at the edge of the scorched plateau, his body aching, blood seeping into his shirt beneath the broken seams of his uniform. But his eyes, those were fixed on the valley below. The colony still stood, tucked beneath the bluffs and reinforced, shielding the patchwork settlement of refugees, nomads, exiles, and dreamers remained untouched. The assault had never reached them. Their fate, balanced on a thread, had been shifted by one child not yet born. Behind him, the shuttle hummed gently. Inside, Alira lay cradled in the recovery bed, skin flushed with a subtle glow. Not exhaustion, not illness. Something deeper, transformation, both cellular and spiritual. Kieran sat beside her, their hands laced. "She's quiet now," Alira whispered. "Sleeping? No. Listening." He nodded. The connection still pulsed beneath his ribs. Their daughter, this emergent, unexpected synthesis, had woven herself into their biology so completely that there was no separation anymore. They didn't carry her. She carried them in part, holding threads of thought between them like spider silk. Consciousness no longer ended where skin did. Alira turned her face toward his. "She doesn't know war, not the way we do." "She doesn't have to," he said softly. She ended one. A soft beep signaled external comms coming online. The colony below was reaching out. Not in panic, not even with questions, just with a steady ping, one pulse after another, a signal of life, a thank you without words. He responded with one of his own. Alira looked out the window, her gaze scanning the broken ridge, the distant curve of the horizon. "What happens now?" she asked. Kieran thought about that for a while. He thought about his former command, about reports and medals and quiet cover-ups, about what the Galactic Assembly would do if they knew what this child could become. He thought of Kyle's last broadcast, snarling about hybrids like they were viruses, and he thought of her, of Alira, and the way she had stood her ground even when broken. He reached into his pack and pulled out the cloth she'd given him, oil-stained, faded. He folded it carefully, reverently. "Now," he said, "we disappear, for a little while. To where? Where they won't follow. Where she can grow." Alira smiled. "There's a world in the Starlace corridor," she said. "Unmapped. Quiet. My mother once said it was full of silver grass and low moons." He ran a hand over her hair, now mussed and ash-flecked, and thought of silver grass. "I want her to know that place." "We'll take her," Alira whispered. "She'll see it all." Their child stirred an echo of light brushing across his consciousness, and for the first time since the bond had formed, Kieran felt not just emotion but language. Not quite words, but clarity. A name, not given but chosen. He whispered it into Alira's ear. Her breath caught, and her smile turned radiant. They left before the scouts arrived, before the assembly's drones came sniffing for survivors. The shuttle, once dead and buried, lifted on beams of quiet light, its hull grafted with living tech from the pod retrofitted with purpose. A vessel no longer built for war, but for witness. Through the viewport, the planet receded. Jara Prime fell behind smoke curling like a memory. Ahead, 1,000 stars blinked open. New roads, unwritten ones. As they passed through the outer ring, Alira leaned her head against Kieran's shoulder. He pressed a kiss to her temple, eyes fixed on the swirling star lanes. The child, still wordless but no longer formless, shifted gently inside her, content. And somewhere deep in the systems of the ship, a fresh log began recording. Not tactical data, not a combat log, but history. Of a war stopped not by fire, but by a link. Of love that burned hot enough to rewire destiny. Of a towel that was never just cloth. And of a child born not just of biology, but of choice. So ends the story of Kieran Holt and Alira of the Emerald Vein. A tale not just of war and survival, but of unlikely connection, genetic fusion, and a child whose very existence turned the tide of history. On the ashes of Jara Prime, something new was born, not just peace, but a promise that even in the darkest corners of the galaxy, compassion can create miracles and trust, when freely given, can rewrite fate. If you found this story thrilling, emotional, and just a little strange in all the right ways, be sure to let us know in the comments below. What would you do if you found yourself bonded for life to a warrior from another world? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the video if you want more cinematic sci-fi stories like this one. Every click helps us keep building these worlds, and who knows, maybe one day you'll see this universe again in a future chapter. Until next time, stay human, stay curious, and stay connected.